This program is being brought to you by the Wellesley Council on Aging. Hello to all of you watching on Wellesley Public Media. The views and opinions expressed are those of the author and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of the Wellesley Council on Aging or Wellesley Public Media. Any content that I provide is of my own personal opinion and is not intended to malign any religion, ethnic group, club, organization, company, individual, or anyone or anything. Hello, everyone. I'm John Horrigan, and welcome to Journey Through the Past. In this edition, It's My Seat. This is part 2 of It's My Seat. Discretion is strongly advised. I now must advise all who are viewing this presentation that I will be using 2 outdated terms that were predominant in historical records, and they may be offensive to you. I will pause now so you have time to stop viewing this presentation and safely move away. Those 2 terms are Negro and colored people. Now, these 2 antiquated terms show up in historical records and court transcripts that we'll be reviewing. For instance, we're going to be reading transcripts from the Browder versus Gale case of 1956, and they even show up in some esteemed national civil rights organizations, such as the NAACP, which is an acronym for the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. And I will attempt to use African American in place of these terms. The program is called It's Her Seat, or It's My Seat. This is a chronology of the struggle for civil rights endured by selective African-American women with a focus on the events that led up to the Montgomery bus boycott in 1955. They took a stand for equal rights by remaining seated. Quote, I knew then and I know now, when it comes to justice, there is no easy way to get it. You have to take a stand and say, this is not right. So the driver then looked at them in his mirror. And this is Claudette now. He asked us both to get up. Mrs. Hamilton said she was not going to get up and that she had paid her fare and that she didn't feel like standing. So I told him I was not going to get up either. So he said, if you're not going to get up, I will get a policeman. And the police arrived and convinced a black man sitting behind the 2 women to move so that Mrs. Hamilton could move back. But Claudette still refused to move. She was forcibly removed from the bus and arrested by 2 policemen, Thomas J. Ward and Paul Headley. When Colvin refused to get up, she was thinking about a school paper that she had written that day about the local custom that prohibited blacks from using dressing rooms in order to try on clothes in department stores. Quote, we couldn't try on clothes. You had to take a brown paper bag and draw a diagram of your foot and then take it into the store. Referring to segregation on the bus and the white woman, she said, she couldn't sit in the same row as us because that would mean we were as good as her. Colvin yelled, it's my constitutional right. She was handcuffed, arrested, and forcibly removed from the bus. She again shouted that her constitutional rights were being violated. Quote, but I made a personal statement too, one that Parks didn't make and probably couldn't have made. Mine was the first cry for justice, and a loud one. I wanted the young African-American girls also on the bus to know that they had a right to be there because they had paid their fare just like the white passengers. This is not slavery. We shouldn't be asked to get up for the white people just because they are white. I just wanted them to know the Constitution didn't say that. 2 police officers boarded and yanked Claudette out of her seat, dragged her off the bus. And then the police officers who took her to the station made sexual comments about her body and took turns guessing her bra size throughout the ride. Claudette thought that she was going to be raped or beaten with a club. And during the brief jail stay, she said, I remember sitting on a cot without a mattress. I can still vividly hear the keys lock me in. Now, over the years, for example, sources mixed up the facts about her pregnancy, with rumors starting that she had been pregnant at the time of her arrest. In fact, she became pregnant that summer, and her son Raymond was born the following spring. This is one of the reasons why they didn't want her to be a lead in the case that would eventually be Browder versus Gale. Let's talk about Aurelia Shines Browder Coleman, born 1919, passed 1971. She was a civil rights activist, a seamstress, a nurse, a midwife, a teacher, and a businesswoman. And in April 1955, almost 8 months before the arrest of Rosa Parks and a month after the arrest of Claudette Colvin, she was arrested for refusing to give up her bus seat to a white rider. She was born in Montgomery, Alabama, where she resided her entire life, and she was the sole economic supporter of her 6 children after she was widowed. Aurelia completed high school in her 30s and then earned a bachelor's degree in science from Alabama State, where she graduated with honors and became a member of the National Honor Society. And while at Alabama State University, Browder met Joanne Gibson Robinson, a professor in the English department, fellow civil rights activist, and a member of the Women's Political Council. Robinson described Aurelia as, quote, well-read, highly intelligent, and fearless. Robinson inspired Browder to get involved and tackle the injustices in the transportation system, encouraging her to participate in the lawsuit proposed by the MIA, the Montgomery Improvement Association. Now, prior to her involvement in the Montgomery bus boycott, Browder was active in the voter registration campaigns of the 1950s, and she spent time tutoring African Americans who wanted to take the voter registration exam, which was very difficult and deliberately made so specifically for African Americans trying to register to vote. And she also provided transportation to the courthouse for those who wanted to register to vote. Now, Aurelia Browder became associated with several civil rights groups during her time, including the NAACP, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, and the SCLC, which was the Southern Christian Leadership Conference that Martin Luther King would go on to lead. Now, she was arrested on April 19th, 1955, again, almost 8 months before Rosa Parks, and a month after the arrest of Claudette Colvin, because she sat in the white section of a public city bus in Montgomery, Alabama. And she was convicted and then fined for her alleged crime. Let's look at Mary Louise Smith. Mary Louise Smith Ware, born 1937. And the reason why I'm giving you all the biographies of these women is because they are all going to be involved in the Browder versus Gale case. October 21st, 1955, Mary Louise Smith, age 18, was returning home by way of the Montgomery City bus. And at a stop after Smith had boarded and seated, a white passenger boarded. There was no place for the white passenger to sit, and Smith was ordered to relinquish her seat. She refused. Smith was arrested and charged with failure to obey segregation orders and given a $9 fine, which her father paid. Now, her case was not widely publicized at the time. And she was a housekeeper, and she refused to give her seat to a white passenger because she was already at her wit's end after trekking across town to retrieve money that a client owed her, only to find the family wasn't home. Quote, this is what she said. A lady got on the bus, and a man got up for her and wanted me to get up and give up my seat. And that's what really popped it off, because I was not going to stand for almost a mile or more to get down to my next destination. I was upset. I might have said a bad word at the time because I was angry. I just didn't feel like it was right. And now let's look at Rosa Parks. She said, quote, at the time I was arrested, I had no idea it would turn into this. It was just a day like any other day. The only thing that made it significant was the masses of the people joined in. Rosa Parks. Rosa Parks was a civil rights activist who refused to surrender her seat to a white passenger on a segregated bus in Montgomery, Alabama. And her defiance sparked the Montgomery bus boycott. And its success launched nationwide efforts to end racial segregation of public facilities. Her bravery led to nationwide efforts to end racial segregation, and she was awarded the Martin Luther King Jr. Award by the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, and also the Presidential Medal of Freedom and the Congressional Gold Medal. Parks was born Rosa Louise McCauley on February 4th, 1913 in Tuskegee, Alabama, and her parents, James and Leona McCauley, separated when Rosa was only 2 years old. Her mother moved the family to Pine Level, Alabama, to live with her parents, Rose and Sylvester Edwards. Now, both of Rosa's grandparents were formerly enslaved people and strong advocates for racial equality, and the family lived on the Edwards farm where Parks would spend her youth. Her childhood brought her early experiences with racial discrimination and activism for racial equality. In one experience, Parks's grandfather stood in front of their house with a shotgun while Ku Klux Klan members marched down their street. Rosa recalled going to the elementary school in Pine Level, where school buses took the white students to their new school and black students had to walk to theirs. Quote, I'd see the bus pass every day, but to me, that was a way of life. We had no choice but to accept what was custom. The bus was among the first ways I realized there was a black world and a white world. Throughout Rosa's education, she attended segregated schools, and she was taught to read by her mother at a young age, and she also attended a segregated one-room school in Pine Level, Alabama, that often lacked adequate school supplies, such as desks. Beginning at age 11, Rosa attended the city's industrial school for girls in Montgomery, and that would be burned down twice by white arsonists. But she became an excellent seamstress. And in 1929, while in the 11th grade and attending a laboratory school for secondary education led by the Alabama State Teachers College for Negroes, Rosa left school to attend to both her sick grandmother and mother back in Pine Level. And she never returned to her studies. Instead, she got a job at a shirt factory in Montgomery. And after marrying in 1932, she earned her high school degree in 1933 with her husband's support. And in 1932, at age 19, Rosa met and married Raymond Parks. He was a barber and also an active member of the NAACP. But the couple never had children. So after graduating high school with Raymond's support, Rosa became actively involved in civil rights issues by joining the Montgomery chapter of the NAACP in 1943, serving as the chapter's youth leader, as well as secretary to the NAACP president, E.D. Nixon, a post she would hold until 1957. I worked on numerous cases with the NAACP, but we did not get the publicity. There were cases of flogging, peonage, murder, and rape. We didn't seem to have too many successes. It was more a matter of trying to challenge the powers that be and to let it be known that we did not wish to continue being second-class citizens. One day in 1943, Parks boarded a bus and paid the fare. She then moved to a seat, but the driver, James F. Blake, told her to follow city rules and enter the bus again from the back door. When Parks exited the vehicle, Blake drove off without her. She already paid her fare. Parks waited for the next bus, determined to never ride with Blake again. On December 1st, 1955, Rosa Parks was arrested for refusing a bus driver's instructions to give up her seat to a white passenger. This is 12 years later. And she later recalled that her refusal wasn't because she was physically tired, but that she was tired of giving in. Quote, "For years, the Black community had complained that the situation was unfair. My resisting being mistreated on the bus did not begin with that particular arrest. I did a lot of walking in Montgomery. And the bus driver was the very same man, James F. Blake, who had left her in the rain 12 years earlier in 1943. After a long day's work at a Montgomery department store where she worked as a seamstress, Parks boarded the Cleveland Avenue bus to go home. She took a seat in the first of several rows that were designated for colored passengers. The Montgomery City Code required that all public transportation be segregated and that bus drivers had the powers of a police officer of the city while in actual charge of any bus for the purposes of carrying out the provisions of the code. While operating a bus, drivers were required to provide separate but equal accommodations for white and black passengers by assigning seats. This was accomplished with a line roughly in the middle of the bus separating white passengers in the front of the bus and African American passengers in the back. When an African American passenger boarded the bus, they had to get on at the front to pay their fare and then get off and reboard the bus at the back door. As the bus Parks was riding on continued on its route, it began to fill up with white passengers, and eventually the bus was full and the driver noticed that several white passengers were standing in the aisle. The bus driver stopped the bus and moved the sign separating the two sections back one row, asking 4 black passengers to give up their seat. The city's bus ordinance didn't specifically give drivers the authority to demand a passenger to give up a seat to anyone, regardless of color. However, Montgomery bus drivers had adopted the custom of moving back the sign separating black and white passengers and, if necessary, asking black passengers to give up their seats to white passengers. The first 4 rows of seats on each Montgomery bus were always reserved for whites, and if the black passenger protested, the bus driver had the authority to refuse service and could call the police to have them removed. Rosa said, "When that white driver stepped back toward us, when he waved his hand and ordered us up and out of our seats, I felt a determination cover my body like a quilt on a winter night." By Parks' account, Blake said, "Y'all better make a light on yourselves and let me have those seats." The driver wanted us to stand up, the 4 of us. We didn't move at the beginning, but he says, "Let me have these seats." And the other 3 people moved, but I didn't. When he saw me still sitting, he asked if I was going to stand up. And I said, "No, I'm not." And he said, "Well, if you don't stand up, I'm going to have to call the police and have you arrested." I said, "You may do that. I would have to know for once and for all what rights I had as a human being and a citizen." Parks moved, but towards the window seat. She did not get up to move to the redesignated colored section. Parks later said about being asked to move to the rear of the bus, quote, "I thought of Emmett Till, a 14-year-old African-American who was lynched in Mississippi just a few months earlier, after being accused of offending a white woman in her family's grocery store, whose killers were tried and acquitted, and I just couldn't go back." And later on, the woman actually confessed that she made up the story many, many years after the event. Two policemen came on the bus, and one asked me if the driver had told me to stand. He wanted to know why I didn't stand, and I told him I didn't think I should have to stand up. I asked him, "Why did they push us around?" He said, "I don't know, but the law is the law, and you are under arrest." I only know that as I was being arrested, that it was the very last time that I would ever ride in humiliation of this kind. I did not want to be mistreated. I did not want to be deprived of a seat that I had paid for. It was just time. There was opportunity for me to take a stand to express the way I felt about being treated in that manner. I had not planned to get arrested. I had plenty to do without having to end up in jail. But when I had to face that decision, I didn't hesitate to do so because I felt that we had endured that too long. The more we gave in, the more we complied with that kind of treatment, the more oppressive it became. That was an interview from NPR 1992. So the police arrested Parks at the scene, and they charged her with violation of Chapter 6, Section 11 of the Montgomery City Code. She was taken to police headquarters, where later that night she was released on bail. Her arrest, though, sparked the Montgomery bus boycott, and it would lead to other boycotts, sit-ins, and demonstrations, many of them led by Martin Luther King Jr., in a movement that would eventually lead to the toppling of Jim Crow laws across the South. Members of the African-American community were asked to stay off city buses on Monday, December 5th, 1955, the very day of Parks's trial, in protest of her arrest. People were encouraged to stay home from work or school, take a cab, or walk to work. With most of the African-American community not riding the bus, organizers believed a longer boycott might be successful. The Montgomery bus boycott, as it came to be known, was a huge success, lasting for 381 days and ending with the Supreme Court ruling declaring segregation on public transit systems to be unconstitutional. E.D. Nixon began forming plans to organize a boycott of Montgomery city buses on December 1st, the very evening that Rosa was arrested. Joanne Robinson stayed up all night copying over 35,000 handbills by a mimeograph machine at Alabama State College. Now, she had to do that in secret. She stayed up all night because if she got caught, she'd be fired. And ads were placed in local papers, and these handbills were printed and distributed in black neighborhoods. The Montgomery bus boycott was not a spontaneous event, however. Various organizations in Montgomery, including the NAACP, the MIA, Montgomery Improvement Association, and the Women's Political Council, WPC, had been waiting for the right moment to begin protest. And again, Joanne Gibson Robinson, led this actually on December 3rd, 1955, 2 days after Rosa's arrest. And Joanne was also targeted with several acts of intimidation. In fact, one local police officer threw a stone through her window and another poured acid on her car. So on the day of Rosa's trial, December 5th, 1955, the WPC distributed the 35,000 leaflets. And this is what the handbill actually read. Let's read it. Another woman has been arrested and thrown in jail because she refused to get up out of her seat on the bus for a white person to sit down. It is the second time since the Claudette Colvin case that a Negro woman has been arrested for the same thing. This has to be stopped. Negroes have rights too, for if Negroes did not ride the buses, they could not operate. 3/4 of the riders are Negro, yet we are arrested or have to stand over empty seats. If we do not do something to stop these arrests, they will continue. The next time, it may be you, or your daughter, or mother. This woman's case will come up on Monday. We are, therefore, asking every Negro to stay off the buses Monday in protest of the arrest and trial. Don't ride the buses to work, to town, to school, or anywhere on Monday. You can afford to stay out of school for one day if you have no other way to go except by bus. You can also afford to stay out of town for one day. If you work, take a cab or walk. But please, children and grown-ups, don't ride the bus at all on Monday. Please stay off all buses Monday. That's the handle. It was effective. So on the morning of December 5th, a group of leaders from the African American community gathered at the Mount Zion Church in Montgomery to discuss strategies and determined that their boycott effort required a new organization and strong leadership. They formed the MIA, the Montgomery Improvement Association, electing Montgomery newcomer Martin Luther King Jr. as minister of the Dexter Avenue Baptist Church. And they chose King to lead the boycott because the young minister was very new to Montgomery, and the city fathers had not had the time to intimidate him. And the MIA believed that Parks's case proved an excellent opportunity to take further action to create real change. So when Parks arrived at the courthouse for trial that morning with her attorney, Fred Gray, pictured here, she was greeted by a bustling crowd of around 500 local supporters who rooted her on. Following a 30-minute hearing, Parks was found guilty of violating a local ordinance and was fined $10 as well as a $4 court fee. Inarguably, the biggest event of the day, however, was what Parks's trial had triggered. The city's buses were, by and large, empty. Some people carpooled and others rode in African-American operated cabs, but most of the estimated 52,000 African-American commuters living in the city of Montgomery at that time had opted to walk to work that day, some as far as 20 miles. Due to the size and scope of, and loyalty to, boycott participation, the effort continued for several months. The city of Montgomery had become a victorious eyesore, with dozens of public buses sitting idle, ultimately severely crippling finances for its transit company. With the boycott's progress, however, came strong resistance. Now I'd like to talk about some of the people who were key in sustaining the bus boycott. One was Mother Pollard, born, we think, 1882, perhaps 1885, and passing perhaps in the year 1962. That's a picture of her on the right. She was dubbed Mother because of her age. Her real first name is unknown. She was an American church elder who participated in the 1955-1956 Montgomery bus boycott, and she's been called a civil rights hero for her tenacity in soothing the spirit of her pastor, the new Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. So she was an elder of the Dexter Avenue Baptist Church during the time of the bus boycott. And Martin Luther King Jr. recounted in his writings that after several weeks of walking to her destinations rather than taking the bus, he suggested to Mother Pollard, then about the age of 72, that she might take the bus again for the sake of her health. She replied, "My feet is tired, but my soul is rested." And she also told him, "God's going to take care of you." Let's talk about Georgia Gilmore. She was a Montgomery cook, midwife, and activist whose secret kitchen fed the civil rights movement. So when Martin Luther King and others held meetings of the Montgomery Improvement Association at the Holt Street Baptist Church, Georgia Gilmore was there, selling fried chicken sandwiches and other foods to the African-American men and women gathered there who'd pledged not to use the city's buses until they were desegregated. And Gilmore poured those profits back into the MIA. She was born in 1920 and passed in 1990, and that's her photograph on the right. So she organized Black women to sell pound cakes and sweet potato pies, fried fish and stewed greens, pork chops, mac cheese, and rice, and they sold them at beauty salons, cab stands, and churches. And she offered these women, many of whose grandmothers were born into slavery, a way to contribute to the cause that would not raise suspicions of white employers who might fire them from their jobs or white landowners who might evict them from their rented houses. And by the way, her kitchen was known as the best place to eat in Montgomery. In fact, when she opened a restaurant later, she had white and black people eat side by side next to each other. The money they raised helped pay for the alternate transportation system that arose in Montgomery during the 381-day bus boycott. Hundreds of cars, trucks, and wagons that ferried Black workers to and from their jobs across town each day. And Gilmore's cooking helped pay for the insurance, gas, wagons, and vehicle repairs that kept that system going. She called her group of women who worked with her in this project the Club from Nowhere because, as Betty Gilmore, George's sister, later said, it was like, where did this money come from? It came from nowhere. She fearlessly denounced the white bus driver who had kicked her off a city bus and began her personal boycott a year earlier in 1954. Quote, "When I paid my fare and they got the money, they don't know Negro money from white money." The testimony made Gilmore a hero to local Blacks, but in the white world, she became a pariah. Gilmore lost her job as a cook at the National Lunch Company. And Reverend King, who is said to have loved her pork chops, said, "Well, why don't you go into business for yourself?" King lived a few blocks from Gilmore, and she was a fan of her cooking and her activism. So whenever VIPs would come into town, Martin would always make Miss Gilmore cook up a batch of her chicken. So she did, and with King's support, Gilmore turned her house into an informal restaurant. Let's talk about Theodora Lacey, born 1932. She was teaching science at George Washington Carver High School, and she was very active in the boycott, working, as she says, as a gopher. She attended meetings and typed press releases for the movement, and many of the participants in the boycott were domestic workers who didn't own cars and relied on the bus system for their jobs. In addition to driving them herself, Lacey was an enthusiastic fundraiser for taxi drivers who supported the boycott by offering free or discounted rides to these boycott participants. She sent letters all over the country seeking donations to help with the maintenance of the taxis. And let's not forget these two women. This is, you see, Irene West and Aretta Adair. They were also instrumental in coordinating the boycott. Let's talk about Thelma McWilliams Glass, born 1932. She was a secretary of the Women's Political Council, which she joined in 1947, and she passed out flyers, alerted the community, and urged passengers to walk or carpool during the boycott. And she soon noticed that every bus that went by was empty of passengers. And although there was sometimes violent retaliation against African Americans across the boycott line, the boycott continued to end also by white people who would attack the people that weren't taking the buses. The boycott continued to demonstrate African American organizing power. Now, some segregationists retaliated with violence. Black churches were burned, and both Martin Luther King and E.D. Nixon's homes were destroyed by bombings. Still, further attempts were made to end the boycott. The insurance was canceled for the city taxi system that was used by African Americans. Black citizens were arrested for violating an antiquating law prohibiting boycotts. Shortly after beginning the Montgomery bus boycott in December 1955, Black community leaders began to discuss filing a federal lawsuit to challenge the city of Montgomery and Alabama bus segregation laws. They sought a declaratory judgment that Alabama state statutes and ordinances of the city of Montgomery, providing for and enforcing racial segregation on privately operated buses, were in violation of 14th Amendment protections for equal treatment. In response, members of the African American community took legal action. Armed with the Brown versus Board of Education decision, which stated that separate but equal policies had no place in public education, a Black legal team took the issue of segregation on public transit systems to the U.S. District Court for the Middle District of Alabama, Northern Montgomery Division, and Parks' attorney, Fred Gray, filed the lawsuit. So on February 1st, 1956, Fred Gray, the attorney for the Montgomery Improvement Association, filed a lawsuit in the U.S. District Court on behalf of 5 Black women who had been the victims of discrimination on local buses, joined by Thurgood Marshall and Robert L. Carter of the NAACP Legal Defense Fund. So let's take a look at Browder versus Gale, 142 F Sup 707, 1956, Civil Action Number 1147, Alabama Middle District Court, Northern Division, May 11th, 1956. So Browder versus Gale was filed listing 5 plaintiffs: Aurelia Browder, Claudette Colvin, Susie McDonald, Janetta Reese, and Mary Louise Smith. Now, Browder was picked as the lead plaintiff because of her age. 2 of the other plaintiffs were teenagers, and the other 2 were senior citizens. And Aurelia was 37 at the time, putting her in the middle of the other plaintiffs, and she was a good representation for all of them. Janetta Reese, sometimes they call her Jeanette, withdrew from the case soon after it was filed. She had originally been a plaintiff in the case, but intimidation by members of the white community, we still don't know who, caused her to withdraw her case in February. She falsely claimed that she had not agreed to the lawsuit, which led to an unsuccessful attempt to disbar Fred Gray for supposedly improperly representing her. William A. Gale, the mayor of Montgomery, was the namesake defendant, along with Montgomery's chief of police, Montgomery's board of commissioners, Montgomery city lines, 2 bus drivers, and the Alabama Public Service Commission representatives. I will now read the transcripts of their testimonies. So now I'm going to read directly from the transcripts of Browder versus Gale. Plaintiffs and the defendants: Aurelia S. Browder, Susie McDonald, Claudette Colvin, Mary Louise Smith. The attorneys here as well for the plaintiff, led by Fred Gray, Charles D. Langford, Robert Carter. Let's look at the first transcript. This is Aurelia Browder, called as a witness, first being duly sworn, testifies as follows. This is the direct examination. Mr. Gray. Okay, remember, that's Fred Gray, her attorney. Mr. Gray says, and I'll use two different voices so you can differentiate between the questioning. State your name, Miss Browder. Aurelia Browder. Where do you live? 1012 Highland Avenue. Prior to December 5th, 1955, did you live here in Montgomery? Yes. Prior to December 5th, 1955, did you ride the city buses? Yes, 2 to 4 times a day. Have you been riding those buses since December 5th, 1955? No. Why did you stop riding them? I had stopped riding because I wanted better treatment. I knew if I would cooperate with my color, I would finally get it. Have you personally experienced any difficulty on the bus in connection with the seating arrangements? Yes, several times. Will you please tell the court what happened? April 29 of last year, I was on the Day Street bus. I got a transfer from Oak Park bus in front of Price Drugstore, going out to get the dry cleaners where I would get on Court and Day. After I rode up by the Alabama Gas Company, bus driver had 3 of us to get up and stand to let a white man and a white lady sit down. When you say 3 of you, do you mean yourself along with 2 other Negroes? Myself and 2 other Negroes. I was sitting in a seat and another lady beside me. And the seat just across from me, there was just one colored person in there. And he made all 3 of us get up because he said we was in the white section of the bus. If you were permitted to sit any place you wanted on the bus, would you be willing to ride again? Yes, I would. That is all. So that's Fred Gray at the end of Aurelia Browder on the witness stand. Okay, and then Judge Reeves says, you may arrange to cross-examine. And then the attorney for the Public Service Commission has no questions to ask this witness. And then Mr. Nabe for the defendants. You say you stopped riding the buses about December 5th, 1955. Is that correct? Yes, sir. And I believe you said you stopped riding at that time because you wanted better treatment. Is that correct? That is right. It is a fact, is not, that at that time the Reverend King and several others, so-called Improvement Association, I believe, made such a demand. Is that right? No. They did make some requests, did they not? I would not call it that. What would you call it then? We, the Negroes, request the Reverend King and not he over us. You didn't understand my question. Did Negro King ask 3 certain things at that time, did he not? One was, he said, for more courteous treatment on the part of the bus drivers. That is correct, isn't it? The Reverend King did not ask that. The Negroes asked that. Very well. But he was the mouthpiece for the Negroes, was he not? We employed him to be our mouthpiece. I see. And that is one of the things you asked for. That is correct, is it not? That is correct. And then you asked for seating, first come, first served, didn't you? Yes. And then you asked for the employment of Negro drivers. That is correct, isn't it? Yes. And you said unless you were granted all 3 of them, you would not return to riding on the bus. Is that correct? Yes. In other words, you did not stop on account of segregation, but you stopped riding before segregation issue was ever raised. That is correct, isn't it? It is the segregation laws of Alabama that caused all of it. Just answer the question. Isn't it a fact that your mouthpiece took into? No, he did not put it into us. Is it not true that he put into the newspaper a statement of his requests, and he specifically stated in that the segregation statutes were not involved? Do you know that? Didn't you read what he put in the papers? Yes, I did. And that was in there, wasn't it? Yes. And also your attorney sitting here, Attorney Gray, also at the meeting where they held it to adjust the differences, put out a mimeograph statement that the segregation laws were in effect. That is correct, isn't it? Yes. And you had the bus boycott on at that time. That is correct, isn't it? That is correct. We have no other questions. Mr. Thrun of the Montgomery City Lines has no questions. Susie McDonald now is sworn in, being duly sworn, testifies as follows. Direct examination. Fred Gray takes a stand here. State your names to the court. Susie McDonald. Where'd you live? Live on Cleveland Avenue. How long have you lived in the city of Montgomery? All of my life. About how long is that? 77 years. Did you ride the city buses here in the city of Montgomery back prior to December 5th, 1955? Yes, twice and sometimes 3 times a day. Have you rode the buses since that time? No, I haven't. Why did you stop riding the buses on or about the 5th of December, 1955? Well, I stopped because we were asking for it, but we didn't expect to get it. We didn't. We all had to stop, so I thought I would stop too. Would you ride the buses if segregation was eliminated on the buses? Yes. Were you involved in any incidents on the bus? Only I had to get up and let some white people sit down. I was asked to move. You were asked to get up? Yes, by the Cleveland Avenue bus driver. I didn't know who they are. They asked me to move. I had to get up. That is all. Mr. Patterson, no questions. Cross-examination, Mr. Name, for the defendants. You heard the questions which I asked a few minutes ago of the preceding witness, didn't you? I heard some of them. I see. Reverend King was the one that the Negroes appointed to represent them, wasn't he? I couldn't tell you very much about that. Now, when they stopped riding the buses, it was December 5th, 1955, was it not? Yes, sir. At that time, there was no agitation of any type among the Negroes for a change in segregation laws or an interpretation of them. Was there? Well, there wasn't any court orders, but we have been mistreated all the time. That is not the reason you stopped riding the buses. Attorney Langford, Your Honor, I think all these questions are irrelevant. It is not what the Negroes of Montgomery have done or will do is not the issue in this case. The question is whether or not this particular person is one who has been injured in being subjected to segregation. Judge Reeves, you have alleged the people stopped riding the buses for a particular reason, and if segregation laws were declared in the matter, they would commence. I overrule your objection. Back to Mr. Nate. The bus boycott, then, was started prior to that time, and you stopped riding the buses prior to the time any reference was made to any change in the segregation laws or the anticipation of it. I didn't stop prior to that time. I had to. I was sick and I couldn't go, but prior to it, I had often been mistreated. You then stopped riding the buses because of ill health, was it not? No, not altogether. I was mistreated, was why I had to stop. Well, was it former years that you were mistreated? Yes, I was mistreated just a few months before the boycott. Well, you didn't stop at that time, did you? No, sir. You stopped at the time there was agitation among the Negroes to stop, didn't you? Well, I don't follow the others, but I reached my own judgment. I stopped because I thought it was right and that we were mistreated. But you stopped at the same time the others stopped, didn't you? Yes. And at that time, they made a public announcement of their grievances against the bus company. That is right. And their grievance at that time said they wanted more courteous treatment. That was one of the main things, wasn't it? Yes, sir. And that had nothing whatsoever to do with the segregation issue, did it? That is what we asked for. We didn't want no social equality. We wanted what we asked for. We wanted recognition. I see. In other words, you stopped. You did not want equality of any type, but you merely wanted recognition. That is right. No further questions. Redirect. Mr. Gray. Question. Will you ride the buses if segregation is removed? Mr. Nave. We object to that question. Judge Reeves. She has said that she will. That is all. You may come down. Now, Mary Louise Smith, next witness, being duly sworn, testified as follows. Direct examination. Mr. Langford takes it. State your name. Mary Louise Smith. Where do you live? 201 Broadway, Chisholm. What is your age? 19 years old. Who are your parents? Frank Smith. That is your father? Yes. Is your mother living? No. Then he resides at the same address you gave a moment ago? Yes. You are one of the plaintiffs in this case? Yes, I am. You are one of the persons who had some incident that occurred before the suit started? Yes. Do you at the present time ride the city buses? No, I don't. How long has it been since you rode the city buses? I rode it twice a day before this happened. Which happened? Before December. Before December 5th, 1955, you rode it 2 days before then. I rode it daily before then. You haven't ridden since? No, I have not. You stopped riding the buses as of that day? Yes. Now, prior to that time, have you had anything to happen to you in any way or any incidents? Yes, I have. Will you tell the court just what happened? This particular incident took place on Highland Avenue bus on October 21st, 1955. I was riding this bus, and I was sitting on the bus side reserved for white and colored. I was sitting behind the side that said for colored. At this particular moment, a white lady got on the bus, and she asked the bus driver to tell me to move out of my seat for her to sit there. And he asked me to move 3 times, and I refused. So he got up and said he would call the cops. And he asked me to move. I told him, I am not going to move out of my seat. I am not going to move anywhere. I got the privilege to sit here like anybody else. And so he said I was under arrest, and he took me to the station. You were arrested at that time? Yes, sir, I was. What happened after that? Well, they arrested me, and they kept me in jail for about 2 hours or longer, and then they charged me $5 in the cost of court. You were subsequently tried in the city court? Yes. And they fined you how much? $9. As I understand it, the bus on which you were riding had a sign, white on one side and colored on the other. Yes, the card said this side for white and an arrow pointed to the back for colored. As I understand it, that in effect was a segregated bus. Yes, that incident happened perhaps because you did have segregation. Yes, you are a Negro and you were required to move from that seat to allow a white woman to sit down. That is right. Had it not been for the rule, no, I'm sorry, I will ask you this. Do you know what you were convicted of at the time they took you from the bus? Mr. Name. We think the record will speak for that. We object to that. We would like for the records to be introduced unless she knows definitely what she was convicted of. We will furnish them any records they want. Mr. Langford says, I asked her if she knew. Do you know what you were convicted of? Judge Reeves says, just answer yes or no. No, I don't. You are in favor of segregation on the bus lines, are you not? Yes, I was. Would you ride the bus again if the laws were changed? I would ride the city buses provided we had no segregation on the buses, on the city buses. Now comes the cross-examination, Mr. Nabe. You said you were convicted back in October 1955. October 21st, 1955. Did you have a lawyer at that time? No. You didn't have any lawyer at all. You did not have lawyer Gray here or no other lawyer. No, sir. You didn't take your case up? You didn't appeal your case, did you? No, sir, I did not. You were not interested at that time in the question of segregation, were you? I have been interested all my life because I have grown up in a period. When did you first employ Attorney Gray in this case? Attorney Gray, I object, Your Honor. When she employed me has nothing to do with it. That is irrelevant. Mr. Nave. One of our contentions is that all this is one scheme and plan. These people have the opportunity when this woman was in there to have tested everything that they asked for today. And we are trying to find out if at that time she was in contact with him and why it couldn't have gone on up in the usual course of procedure. Attorney Gray, Your Honor, whether or not she decides to exhaust the state judicial remedy under the federal code is a question of law and not a question of fact. Judge Reeves, sustain the objection. Now, you said on this incident you mentioned here, he said you are under arrest. Now, who is he? Policeman. The policeman of the city of Montgomery? Yes. It was not anybody on the city lines, is that right? Yes, sir. It was not the driver of the bus, was it? Yes. He first tells me to get up and move. I asked you one question. You said someone said you were under arrest. Are you riding free at this time? No, I am not riding at all. You are not riding any of the free buses that the churches are all furnishing you? We don't have no free buses. Do you mean you pay for the buses when you ride on them? What bus? These station wagons. No, we ride those free. Now, you are riding those free then, aren't you? Yes, I am. All right, now, you said you stopped riding on December 5th. Why did you happen to decide on that particular day? Well, I think one person has been treated wrong and somebody else has been treated wrong. I just feel like I want to cooperate and do what I can to help them. You say that you say you feel you should cooperate. Who are you cooperating with? With the colored people of Montgomery. Did you get together and agree to stop riding on December 5th? No, we didn't get together. We just stopped ourselves. You must have had a meeting. Who gave you instructions to stop on December 5th? Did one say to the other, I'm going to stop riding? And everybody at one time stopped? They must have said because nobody went back on the bus. Now, somebody said, let's stop on a certain day. Now, who was that? I really don't know. But that was at the time when you had your first negotiations with the bus company in the city, wasn't it? That you stopped. Is that correct? That was on December 5th. That is the time you stopped riding the buses, wasn't it? Yes. And at that time, nothing was said about segregation whatsoever, was there? Something has been said about segregation as long as I have been living. I have known myself. You didn't represent to anybody anything about segregation, did you? To any of the officials at all? Well, I still just answer the question. You yourself did not at any time say anything about segregation to any of the officials, city officials, did you? I did not say anything to them. As a matter of fact, Reverend King represented you, didn't he? No, he doesn't represent no one. We represent ourselves. We appointed him as our leader. You appointed him as your leader, our leader. But he did all represent the colored people. He was a spokesman for the colored people. That is correct, is it not? Yes, in his assistance. That is all. Attorney Gray, you do object to segregation now? Yes, I do. Do the rest of the Negroes in the Montgomery section object to segregation? Yes, they do. Mr. Dave, we object. Judge Reeves, overruled. Mr. Gray, that is all. Now, Claudette Colvin is called as a witness, being duly sworn, testifies as follows. Here's the direct examination. Fred Gray, attorney for the plaintiff. Question. State your name. Claudette Colvin. What is your address, Miss Colvin? 658 Dixie Drive. How old are you? 16. Who are your parents? C.P. Colvin and Marianne Colvin. You are one of the plaintiffs in this lawsuit. Yes. Prior to December 5th, 1955, last year, did you ride the city buses? Yes. How often did you ride? Twice a day. Twice a day? Yes. Have you rode the buses since then? No. Did you have any incident at any time while you were riding the buses? Yes. When did this incident occur? March 2nd, 1955. What bus did you ride? Highland Gardens. About what time was it? About 2:30 p.m. Where were you on the way to? I was going home from school. Will you please tell the court exactly what happened on March 2nd, 1955? I rode the bus as it was turning in on Perry and Dexter Avenue. And me and some other school children, I sit on the seat on the left-hand side, on the seat just above the emergency door, me and another girl beside me. You say another girl was sitting by you and another girl was sitting across from you. Do you mean those two girls were Negroes? Yes, sir. And he drove on down to the next block, and by the time all the people got in there, he seen there were no more vacant seats. He asked us to get up, and the big girl got up, but I didn't. So he drove on down into the square, and some more people boarded the bus. So Mrs. Hamilton, she got on the bus, and she sat down beside me, and that leaves the other seat vacant. You mean that from across the aisle, the other two girls had gotten up when the bus driver requested them to? Yes, sir. So he looked back through the window, and he saw us, and he was surprised to see she was sitting down too. He asked her to get up then, and he asked both of us to get up. She said she was not going to get up. She didn't feel like it. He drove on down to the next corner or block rather, and when he got up and asked us to get up, and she told him she was not going to get up, that she paid her fare, and that she didn't feel like standing. And so he asked me to get up, so he directly asked me to get up first, so I told him I wasn't going to get up. He said, if you're not going to get up, I will get a policeman. So he went somewhere and got a policeman. The first policeman came in the back way and asked who it was. So he told the policeman who I was. Anyway, he said, why are you not going to get up? He said, it is against law here. So I told him that I didn't know that it was a law that a colored person had to get up and give a white person a seat when there were not any more vacant seats and colored people were standing up. So he got off. And then two policemen came in. He said, who is it? And he was very angry about it. He said, this is not new. I had trouble out of that thing before. So he said, aren't you going to get up? He didn't say anything to Mrs. Hamilton then. He just said it to me. He said, aren't you going to get up? I said, no. He saw Mrs. Hamilton, but he was afraid to ask her to get up. He said, if any of you are not gentlemen enough to give a lady a seat, you should be put in jail yourself. And so Mr. Harris, he got up and gave her a seat and immediately got off the bus. He said, you can have that seat. I am getting off. And so she taken his seat, and I didn't have a seat. So he asked me if I was not going to get up. I said, no, sir. I was crying then. I was very hurt because I didn't know that white people would act like that. And I was crying. And he said, I'll have to take you off. So I didn't move. I didn't move at all. So I just acted like a big baby. So he kicked me and got on one side of me and got on the other arm, and they just drugged me out. And I was so very pitiful. It really hurt me to see that I had to give a person a seat when all those colored people were standing and there were not any more vacant seats. I had never seen nothing like that. Well, they take me on down. They put me in a car, and one of the motorcycle men, he says, I am sorry to have to take you down like this. So they put handcuffs on me through the window. After that, where did they take you? They'd taken me to the city hall. While you were at the city hall, did anyone ask your age? Yes, they asked my age and everything. Where did you go from the city hall? I went to the city jail. Did they mention anything to you about taking you to the detention home, the juvenile court, instead of the city jail? Yes, sir, one of the policemen. So they took you to the city jail? Yes, sir. How long were there? It was over an hour. What happened when you got to the city jail? Well, all the people were staring at me and asked me what was wrong. One of the policemen said she didn't want to sit back there with the Negroes. And so he said, if any more of them act like that, she was the only one that didn't want to move back. So they put me in the cell and locked the door. And you stayed there until your parents came and made bond? Yes, sir. Were you tried later in juvenile court? Yes, sir. Were you tried for violating the segregational laws? Mr. Knabe says, we object unless she knows. Mr. Gray, he says, do you know whether you were tried and convicted of violating the segregation laws? I was. Mr. Knabe, we object to that question. We would like for him to ask her what she was convicted of. There are several segregation laws. Judge Reeves says, you can ask her if she knows what she was convicted of. Mr. Gray says, do you know what you were charged with? Yes, I do. What were you charged with? I was charged with violating the city code or certain sections of the city code. Do you know whether or not that section was amended at the time of the trial? I really don't know. But you were convicted. Yes, I was. And if you were able to ride the buses here in Montgomery without being segregated on them, would you still be willing to ride? No. Would you be willing to ride the bus if you could sit any place you wanted on them? Yes, sir. From your observation of your friends and your neighbors in your community, would they be willing to ride buses if they could sit any place they wanted to? Yes, sir. Now comes the cross-examination for the defendants from Mr. Knabe. You have changed, that is, you and the other Negroes have changed your ideas since December 5th, haven't you? No, sir, we haven't changed our ideas. It's been in me ever since I was born. But the group stopped riding the buses for certain named things. That is correct, isn't it? For what? For certain things that Reverend King said were the things that you objected to. No, sir. It was in the beginning when they arrested me, when they seen how dirty they treated the Negro girls here, that they had began to feel like that all the time, though some of us just didn't have the guts to stand up. Did you have a leader when you started this bus boycott? Did we have a leader? Our leaders is just we ourselves. We are just a group of people. Did you select anyone to represent you like Reverend King? We did select, quite naturally. We are not going to have any ignorant person to lead us, and we have to have someone who is strong enough to speak up, someone with intelligence enough. We have got to have someone who can stand up and who knows the law and who knows it is quite natural that we are not going to get up there ourselves, and some of them can't even read or write, but they knew they were being treated wrong. Is Reverend King the one you selected? We didn't select him. You said you selected somebody who was better informed to represent you. Now, who did you select? Well, I don't know anything about selecting, but we all just got together. But somebody spoke for your group, and now, who was it? I don't know. We all spoke for ourselves. Now, just a minute ago, I understood you to say that you selected somebody that knew the law better. Now, who was that person? We knew the laws better. Now, a lot of people know the laws better. Now, you are trying to say that Reverend King is the leader of the whole thing? I am merely asking if Reverend King was one of the leaders who represented you at that time, or one of the leaders who represented your group at that time and expressed to the city commission what the Negroes wanted. Probably he was one of them who went to the city commissioners, but I don't know. You don't know it all then? I don't know nothing. Now, was Attorney Gray here one of those whom you felt knew the laws? Yes, quite naturally. He's a lawyer. Now, did you know at that time that he sustained that the state law didn't apply at all to the city of Montgomery? What did you say about the state laws applying to the city of Montgomery? Did you know that is what he was saying at that time? I go to school myself, and I know there's a lot of law, national law, state law, and local law. Why did all of you stop riding on December 5th? Because we were treated wrong, dirty, and nasty. Now, the reason you stopped riding was because you had 3 things you asked. Is that right? 3 things we asked. Yes, we would still be treated the same way if we were to ask for these things. At that time, didn't you have in the paper an advertisement that represented your group, who spoke for your group, and you set forth 3 things that you felt were the things that caused the boycott? The thing that caused the whole boycott, Reverend King caused the whole trouble. Mr. Langford, if the court please, I would like to interpose an objection to the question for the reason that the question is irrelevant. Then goes back to Knabe. Reverend King said the Improvement Association published in the Advertiser, did it not, a statement of the things you wanted in order to stop the bus boycott? Did or did he not? Yes. And those 3 things that he asked for, first, more courteous treatment. Is that correct? Yes. And the second thing he asked was for seating from back to front for colored people and from front to back for white people. Is that correct? I don't know about that. And then that's the end of the testimony for Claudette Colvin. On June 5th, the judges released their decision. Segregated buses violated the equal protection and due process guarantees of the 14th Amendment and were therefore unconstitutional. The city of Montgomery could not enforce any law which may require plaintiffs or any other Negroes similarly situated to submit to segregation and the use of bus transportation facilities in the city of Montgomery. In June of 1956, the district court declared racial segregation laws, also known as Jim Crow laws, unconstitutional. And the city of Montgomery appealed the court's decision shortly thereafter, but on November 13th, 1956, the U.S. Supreme Court upheld the lower court's ruling declaring segregation on public transport to be unconstitutional. Here's the press conference afterwards. So both the city and the state appealed the decision, and on December 17th, 1956, the Supreme Court upheld the ruling, issuing a court order to the state of Alabama to desegregate its buses. So while the Montgomery bus boycott sparked by Rosa Parks gained lasting national attention, it was Browder's court case that resulted in segregation laws being declared unconstitutional. And with a transit company and downtown businesses suffering financial loss and the legal system ruling against them, the city of Montgomery had no choice but to lift its enforcement of segregation on public buses, and the Montgomery bus boycott ended after 381 days, officially on December 20th, 1956. The combination of legal action backed by the unrelenting determination of the African American community made the Montgomery bus boycott one of the largest and most successful mass movements against racial segregation in history. Although she had become a symbol of the civil rights movement, Rosa Parks suffered hardship in the months following her arrest in Montgomery and the subsequent boycott. She lost her job at the department store, and her husband was fired after his boss forbade him to talk about his wife or their legal case. Unable to find work, they eventually left Montgomery and moved to Detroit, Michigan, along with Rosa's mother. There, Parks made a new life for herself, working as a secretary and receptionist in U.S. Representative John Conyers' congressional office. In 1992, she published her story, Rosa Parks' My Story, an autobiography recounting her life in the segregated South. And in 1995, she published Quiet Strength, which includes her memoirs and focuses on the role that religious faith played throughout her life. Now, at age 81, Rosa was robbed and assaulted in her home in central Detroit on August 30th, 1994. The assailant, Joseph Skipper, broke down the door but claimed he had chased away an intruder. He requested a reward, and when Parks paid him, he demanded more. Parks refused, and he attacked her. Hurt and badly shaken, Rosa called a friend who called the police. Now, a neighborhood manhunt led to Skipper's capture, and Rosa was treated for facial injuries. And Rosa said about the attack on her by the African-American man, quote, "Many gains have been made, but as you can see, at this time, we still have a long way to go." Skipper was sentenced to 8 to 15 years, and Rosa moved into the Riverfront Towers, a secure high-rise apartment building, and Little Caesars owner Mike Ilitch, he also owned, I believe, the Detroit Red Wings, offered to pay for her housing expenses for as long as necessary. On October 24th, 2005, Rosa quietly died in her apartment in Detroit at age 92. She had been diagnosed the previous year with progressive dementia, which she had been suffering from at least since 2002. Her death was marked by several memorial services, among them lying in honor at the Capitol Rotunda in Washington, where an estimated 50,000 people viewed her casket. She was interred between her husband and mother at Detroit's Woodlawn Cemetery and the chapel's mausoleum. And shortly after her death, the chapel was renamed the Rosa L. Parks Freedom Chapel. Now, Parks received many accolades during her lifetime, including the Spingarn Medal, the NAACP's highest award, and the prestigious Martin Luther King Jr. Award. On September 15th, 1996, President Bill Clinton awarded Parks the Presidential Medal of Freedom, the highest honor given by the United States executive branch. And the following year, she was awarded the Congressional Gold Medal, the highest award given by the U.S. legislative branch. Time magazine named Rosa Parks on its 1999 list of the 20 most influential people of the 20th century. And in 2000, Troy University created the Rosa Parks Museum, photographed lower right, located at the site of her arrest in downtown Montgomery, Alabama. And in 2001, the city of Grand Rapids, Michigan, consecrated Rosa Parks Circle, a 3.5-acre park designed by Maya Lin, an artist and architect best known for designing the Vietnam War Memorial in Washington, D.C. A biographical movie starring Angela Bassett and directed by Julie Dash, The Rosa Parks Story, was released in 2002, and that movie won the 2003 NAACP Image Award, Christopher Award, and Black Reel Award. February 4th, 2013 would have marked what would have been Rosa's 100th birthday, and in commemoration and celebration, The U.S. Postal Service developed a stamp called the Rosa Parks Forever stamp and featured a rendition of the famed activist. Also in February 2013, President Barack Obama unveiled a statue designed by Robert Furman and sculpted by Eugene Daub honoring Parks in the nation's Capitol building. He remembered Parks, according to the New York Times, by saying, quote, "In a single moment, with the simplest of gestures, she helped change America and change the world. And today she takes her rightful place among those who shaped this nation's course." Rosa Parks. That's my presentation. It's my seat. I'm John Horrigan. Thank you so much for watching. This is part 2 of It's My Seat.